Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, became the governor of Minnesota right before the BLM riots of 2020 broke out. Blaze Media national correspondent Julio Rosas was on the ground when Minneapolis was burning under Walz's watch. Let's take a look. Julio Rosas is in studio with us right now. So just watching some of that, take us back to that time. What was it like to be on the ground in Minnesota in 2020?
It was unlike anything I'd ever covered. I had previously covered Charlottesville all the way back in 2017, and so this was on a completely different level. So that video you just played, that was when the Minnesota Police Department was ordered to evacuate from the 3rd Precinct because that's where Derek Chauvin was originally assigned out of. So they had besieged that station for the entire week. The riots had broken out for that entire week, and that was Thursday. And I distinctly remember when I was posting videos, even before that point, people were asking, where's the Minnesota National Guard? We keep hearing the National Guard supposedly is supposed to be out there. And in that vicinity, they weren't there. They weren't fully deployed until Friday, the next day. But by then, the rioters, the BLM rioters, scored a major victory. By forcing the mayor to give the order to evacuate. And I can tell you that being outside the precinct, the rioters many times vocally expressed their desire to set the building on fire with the officers still inside. So, I mean, if they hadn't evacuated for probably another 10 minutes, things could have been drastically worse.
Matthew?
Unbelievable. I mean, who was responsible for that? That decision to not to have that guard there.
So the mayor, Jacob Frey, I don't know how you say his name, but the mayor has many faults in this, obviously, but the decision to deploy the National Guard or to activate it is either the governor or the president. And so the mayor, about 2 months later, he revealed that he was, on that Wednesday, he was desperately trying to get Walz to get the National Guard activated. And he said that, he was going to consider it. And this was by night 2, when they had that phone call. And then night 3 is when the precinct was set on fire.
Now, I remember this. I'm sure you do too, Jill, and many of us were watching this happen every night, right? And I remember thinking, like, wow, they send someone. You have to save the police station. You're not actually going to let this thing burn. And what you're saying is the governor of the state of Minnesota, in fact, bears responsibility because he refused to get off his duff and send any help.
Yeah, and I've talked to members of MPD who did defend the 3rd Precinct for days, and they said that there were many mistakes made in the defense plans for the station, but they were starting to gain a foothold. They were starting to open up their supply lines. They needed the manpower. And so there was a big mistake in the thinking from the mayor, and then I think ultimately the governor, was that, well, if we give up the police station, we'll give the rioters what they want, and then things will calm down. But that's not what happened, because then that Friday, when the National Guard was out there, along with state police and along with a few other law enforcement agencies, they set up a perimeter around the 3rd Precinct. But then once rioters started to attack them again after the curfew was announced, they withdrew from the area entirely. They withdrew all the way down Lake Street until the 5th Precinct, and the rioters tried to set that on fire because why not? They set fire to one station, but because they were unsuccessful in being able to do that, they then just had their way with the rest of that area, and so it was just a very dumb mistake for both the mayor and the governor to allow that to happen.
Now, it's interesting to listen to your firsthand account being there, but I don't know if you understand, because the media was telling us these were mostly peaceful protests. There wasn't that many bad things happening at the time, Julio.
It was just utter chaos. I mean, to this day, I consider Minneapolis to be the worst riot that I've covered to date.
Wow.
But it's because it localized in South Minneapolis, which is where the 3rd Precinct was located, but it spread out throughout the rest of the city, and then it started to hit St. Paul, and then it went out for the rest of the country. And so that's why losing that police station and not getting the resources there on the ground fast enough, was disastrous because it set the tone for the rest of the country for the rest of this chaotic period. As I wrote for the Blaze, Chaz Chop in Seattle was created because the mayor ordered her officers out of the East Precinct to try to appease the rioters, to try to stop the rioting, because it's clearly only the officers' fault that this is happening. And that was also a disastrous thing. So it showed these far leftists that if they just have the conditions just right, they can achieve a pretty significant victory. And to this day, they consider May 28th to be a great success for their tactics and for their movement.
So if we go from 2020 now to present day, and Tim Walz is now named as the vice presidential pick for Kamala Harris, what do you think people will remember about Walz as we get closer to November?
I can tell you for this aspect of his governorship, because obviously there's many other disastrous aspects, but it's not going to be remembered favorably. I mean, people understand that this was a huge failure for the state and local level. When you pay taxes, this is why we pay taxes, right? It is to have what we know to be peace and security, and that just evaporated. Not just Minneapolis, but it started there. Right. And like I said, it set the tone for the rest of this chaotic period. And we're still kind of dealing with the low intensity effects of that to this day. And things are kind of ramping back up. Right. And it all comes back to how Democratic and liberal politicians tried to appease the mob during this because they didn't want to be labeled racist. They didn't want to have the bad headlines of, oh, we're cracking down on mostly peaceful protests. But I mean, there was clear lines of like what's an actual peaceful protest and what's a riot. And on May 28th, the rioters attacked first.
Matthew, when we look at this, they're going out there and they're trying to say that Walz is Midwest nice today. And it's great. You can go out and you can say that. But the fact is he's trying to go out there and transit kids. He's putting tampons in men's bathrooms. He's doing all of these very radical things. But yet, even after the BLM riots, even after all this, they're trying to just paint him as a nice, normal guy.
No, he's not. He's one of these Midwest hyper-liberal lunatics, and cackles the vacuous Veep. She's ascended, and this is the perfect person to have under her. They're doubling down on this radicalism and this lunacy, and you have to think about this. I mean, he is personally responsible, as Julio is telling us tonight. Personally responsible for not sending the National Guard in to prevent the burning of a police station that led to riots throughout the entire country. And meanwhile, she was sitting there asking us all to donate money to bail these people out of jail. And that's who's running for president in the year of our Lord 2024.